Welcome to Sector Report. I'm David Beatson. This week, new road rules for rural contractors. A change for the better? Kiwis need lots of care, but can you farm around them? And the Hawke's Bay farmer who's become a man on a mission.
We used the sentencing issue unashamedly as a pretty blunt stick to beat some common sense into what I saw was a senseless society, a senseless justice system.
Well, Garth McVicar is the familiar face of the Sensible Sentencing Trust. He's been crusading for change now for the last 11 years, and he's achieved quite a few. 3 strikes and it's life for violent offenders, the $50 offender levy to fund reparation for victims, and more recognition of victims' rights in the court processes. But how's it affected the Hawke's Bay farmer who's become this man with a mission? And what's next on his agenda? Rural correspondent Neil Parker is on the trail.
Witness the wall of shame.
These people have all been murdered at some stage, and we help and work with their families.
How many of them are there?
Oh, look, I mean, the families that we represent are only, there's a small fraction of them on the board here. There's around about 40.
Since it began in 2001, the Sensible Sentencing Trust has worked for nearly 800 victims of crime. Looking at these pictures,
Yeah.
Are you haunted by them?
Yeah, look, I don't mind admitting, I remember sitting in a spa pool with my wife one night and thinking this might get me, you know?
Do you think it does get you, doesn't it?
Yeah. Emotionally it gets me, but I'm able to take that emotion in and turn it into a positive and get an outcome for the families. We take it in, we discover what's failed within the system, and we try and change that. We can't bring that person back, but we can turn the failings of the system into a positive. We can change that for them so that hopefully we can reduce the number of victims. That's what it's all about.
It was the brutal killing of 6-year-old Teresa Cormack in Napier in 1997 that not only shocked the nation but finally made Garth stand up.
You know, I think as we watched what was happening in New Zealand as violent crime, murder became more frequent, I think we looked at, we thought judges or politicians or someone would step up somewhere. So we didn't think it was our responsibility, and I certainly didn't. And when young Teresa got killed, it was one of the catalysts that made me set up Sensible Sentencing Trust. It wasn't the catalyst, it was one of those things that I was absorbing and taking in and thinking, what's gone wrong in this country? The justice system was putting more and more offenders back out on the street. The guy that killed her had 78 previous violent offences and was put back out amongst the street. Unsuspecting community.
In 2001, repeat offender William Bell murdered 3 people at the Panmure RSA.
108 previous offences, and they still let the guy out.
Yeah.
So, and he killed 3 people. And then the system goes ho-hum, so what? Well, we said no, ho-hum's not good enough, so we're suing them. What we're paying for now, I believe, is this whole criminal-friendly mentality that was in New Zealand, that they would all be rehabilitated. They had an illness, we could treat that illness. Bullshit. We can't treat that illness. They are evil, the beast is evil. And we should have had legislation that says, no, sorry. 42 women? When is enough enough? At some point we say, no, sorry, it's not about you anymore, it's about protecting society from you. Throw away the key on the beast.
When Garth started the Sensible Sentencing Trust, his farming neighbour, Jack Nicholas, was the first person to make a donation.
He was so keen about what we were doing, and he ran a garage sale here for us in Napier to help fund the thing. And then, he's also my neighbour.
Then at 6:30 in the morning of August the 7th, 2004, 3 shots rang out, and Jack Nicholas was shot dead at his garden gate.
I didn't believe it because the first news we heard was that a farmer in Puketichi had been killed. And then later in the day, it came through that it was Jack, and I didn't believe that. Jack and I were good friends. More than just a campaigner, he agreed with what we were doing, but we'd become good friends and had a lot in common. They all affected me. It takes a while before you can actually recover your mojo, if you like, to turn it into a positive, to try and change the system. As we all know now, there was nobody was convicted for that murder, and I think that's a sad indictment on New Zealand. Very sad.
And that's what drives you, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, because I was born at a time when New Zealand was the safest country in the Western world. Yeah, hi, Garth speaking.
So how did it start? For Garth, it was simple.
I was waiting for a judge or a politician or someone to step up. Nobody did, so we decided to give it a crack.
Garth says he's not a vengeful man. He has no political or religious affiliations and doesn't want to hang people from the highest tree. It's just that the justice system has got out of kilter.
We only have 2 people in this country in prison that their first crime was murder. So most people who kill have got a background history of hardcore offending. So they don't wake up and get out of bed one morning and think, I'm going to go and kill someone. They don't. They've obviously committed that, as I see, apprenticeship. They've done their apprenticeship, that's the way, realistically, and they haven't been held accountable or responsible for their actions.
Now Garth says there's a culture change in the country, that bureaucrats and officials are picking up on a new mood within society.
We aren't just going to roll over and wave the white flag now. More and more people are standing up and saying, we remember New Zealand, we think it can be better, and so do we.
The Trust's successes also include the controversial 3 strikes legislation to contain repeat offenders. And Garth says that message is getting through.
They say these people are pretty dumb. No, they're not dumb. They know there's a new sheriff in town. They know there's a new mood happening in the country.
It's been a tough 10-year battle with few holds barred.
I've got to say here, I mean, look, we use the sentencing issue unashamedly as a pretty blunt stick to beat some common sense into what I saw was a senseless society, a senseless justice system that was evolving. So we focused on the sentencing issue, knowing that we were going to upset people. We said some pretty provocative stuff. We meant it, but we got people off the fence. I don't care what side people come off the fence on, whether it's up on our side or against us. The debate now is running at a level that I've never seen it at before.
Along the way, Garth hasn't made himself popular. He's been called all sorts of names, and worse. Have you been threatened?
Yep. I'm a little careful about where I get out of my car. I'm a little careful where I park. I'm careful what streets I walk down.
How do you cope with this?
I've got a wonderful family. That's my sanity block. I jump on my motorbike and roar up the back of the farm. You can't get anything better than this. But it also gives you the opportunity to get your thoughts together. You know, we're obviously dealing on some pretty hard issues and how to bang politicians' heads together, get the bureaucrats, get the law changed, and, you know, sometimes out here all of a sudden the dots line up, if you like. There's 4 generations of us here. I mean, that doesn't happen very often in New Zealand, and we brought our kids up, I think, with the values my parents brought me up, and that is that you know, we should be trying to, all of us should be trying to make a difference, make this country the safe country that it was when I was a kid. I think that's where we've gone wrong. You know, it's not just morals, it's boundaries, values, consequences, all of those type of things. I mean, it's not really rocket science, I don't think, where we've gone wrong as a nation, but we're paying a horrific price for that. You know, a lot of the families we deal with. We've become so liberal over the last 25 or 30 years that legislation has, I believe, has set us on the wrong path as a nation.
The Sensible Sentencing Trust is now in its 11th year. It's had many wins, including victims' rights, 3 strikes, and giving the police the power to take DNA.
But I believe the biggest win that we've had is the change of culture that's happening in New Zealand now. We aren't just rolling over and waving the white flag and saying, what can we do about it? Things are changing now, and we've got a groundswell, we've got a tide change happening. I think certainly a culture change happening.
But the battle isn't over yet.
There's still a lot of these old, bold bureaucrats in Wellington who have driven the social agenda, who are responsible for this escalating level of crime. They are still employed in Wellington. I think if we backed off now, you'd see them stepping forward again with their agenda. I think we've got to keep the foot on the accelerator for a little while yet.
Neil Parker with Garth McVicar. And next, how new road rules are going to change rural life. Stay with Sector Report. Rural contractors have been waging a long, hard campaign to get the road rules changed for agricultural vehicles. Now, these vehicles spend most of their time off-road and on the farm, but they've been subjected to a rigorous regime of complicated rules that have worried farmers and rural contractors for years and cost them plenty of money in fines. Well, the Ministry of Transport has just produced its proposal for change. And here's the Chief Executive of the Road Transport Forum, Ken Shirley. Ken, thanks for joining us. Quite a lot of business in your sector at the moment. Two big changes, road user charges and agricultural vehicles. Can I start with that?
Sure.
Now, I mean, there's been a hell of a long campaign about the agricultural vehicles. Do these changes actually cover all of those issues that have been raised?
With transport, you'll never cover all of the issues.
Yeah.
It's very complex and very prescriptive legislation, and we have very firm rules for road transport. But with the agricultural vehicle review, I think it's a recognition that these are specialist vehicles doing specialist tasks. A lot of the times it's off the road, and therefore they do have different exemptions, things like work time rules and just some of the rather very prescriptive conditions that apply to on-road use.
Yeah, well, I want to come to this work time rule, because I mean, you are concerned about safety, you're concerned about driver fatigue. These guys can work up to 18 or more hours a day. Now, they're still behind a wheel, they're still doing something, and then they might come out on the road.
Indeed, and bear in mind, it's not driving hours, it's work time hours. And what we have in the general provision is that 14 hours maximum, you then need 12-hour breaks, and you have to keep logbooks. And for the commercial drivers on the road, it's very firmly policed, and it needs to be. And in fact, our work time rules are quite generous compared with other jurisdictions. But what we have is a special exemption for agricultural contractors, particularly recognising that if you've got to get a crop of seed in ahead of the rain or something like that, or in haymaking, you can get out to 18 hours. But it has to be offset with a compensatory break the following day. That's
fine, you've still worked a long time.
Well, it's a long time.
I mean, one of the things that I know that was upsetting the rural contractors was the fact that you had to have a written permission if you were going to vary
I think it needs to be.
your working time.
It needs to be, because there are examples where people will work on farm for many hours and then go out and hop behind a truck or drive the truck to the mill or something like that. It does need to be policed firmly, and the 18 hours of itself is generous. So I think any relaxation of that is actually unrealistic and could pose a road safety issue.
Well, the other issue is, of course, the exemption for what are called Class 1 vehicles, which are vehicles that don't travel at more than 40k on the road, from having a warrant of fitness.
Yes.
Now, if they're on the road, why wouldn't you want them to have a warrant of fitness?
Well,
at 40k, you can still do a bit of damage.
Well, this is not law yet. This is still before the Parliament as part of the review. And there's a lot of people actually asking that very good question. One of the practical issues is with a big tractor, it actually doesn't fit in the vehicle testing. If you go to VTNZ to have it for its warrant of fitness, they're very hard to do. But whether that's going to pass into law or not, we don't know at this stage. What we do know from the Road Transport Forum's perspective is some of these big vehicles are actually going quite long distances, not paying road user charges, and some trucking operators feel that they can take away their business
they
without
might have the capacity to do more than 40k.
Indeed, without having to comply with the same strict road safety conditions, no warrant of fitness. So those issues need...
So you've got a potential tension within your sector.
Absolutely, right. and I think the agricultural contractors are an associate member of the forum, and we recognise the need. We're an agricultural country with the production's critical to our exports. We need to have sensible rules, but at the end of the day, safety issues are paramount. And some of our members also have a commercial interest that we don't see unfair competition based on dual standards. That would be unfair.
Okay. I mean, what's the process and timetable for dealing with those agricultural vehicle changes?
Well, the government, the ministry's got that review out there at the moment. It's had the consultation. There's been various inputs. We've made a submission to it, and other interested and affected parties have. And in the next few months, we'll be getting a decision on just what they're going to do. Some of it might require a change of law, so then we'll see bills into Parliament to give it effect. At this stage, it's really just a policy discussion document. Okay,
the other big change, of course, at the moment is road user charges, and I see the forum has been welcoming those changes, but some of the sectors, again, are having a bit of a mixed, giving it a bit of a mixed reception. It's been fine for the big trucks, the high capacity trucks, but not so good for the little courier trucks. And
it's a mixed bag. It's a taxation system at the end of the day. Our overall position is we don't like the road user charges system that was introduced in 1978. It's very prescriptive. It was calculated had about $120 million of deadweight costs in terms of compliance, administration costs and evasion. And what government's done is an attempt to simplify it. Now, we support their attempts to simplify it, but in doing that, it's changed the world for a lot of people. Before, you used to have operator-nominated weights. So an operator could buy a distance licence and nominate the load they would carry. And unfortunately, some of the evasion was around that. What's changed now is it's tied to the carrying capacity of your vehicle.
Regardless of what
absolutely.
Load or volume
so
you're carrying.
if you're carrying bricks, you can near the capacity. If you're carrying pink bats or something light, you'll be paying more.
For the rural consumer of transport services, is this going to be a better deal, a neutral deal, or is it going to be a tricky deal?
It's certainly simpler. Once we iron out some of the problems, I think it should be clearer, less opportunity for evasion, and of course you're not evading government with this. Government just says, I want X million or $1 billion from road user charges, and it's the dishonest and the evader are actually subsidised by the honest and the compliant. So, but it will change. And those changes will have to be reflected in prices. At the end of the day, road freight or transporting has to be profitable. So in some instances, farmers will have to pay more for their inputs, but in other instances, their exports will be more efficient. There'll be higher productivity because of these measures, which will mean as a nation we'll be more competitive in getting because it's the logs, it's the milk, it's the livestock to the factory, the processing works, and then on to the port with the processed goods. It is certainly encouraging greater efficiency, higher productivity, but there are changes with overs and unders in the actual numbers of transport.
Inputs more expensive, exports
more
cost efficient.
Well, generally,
Okay,
light
that's
inputs will be more expensive. Heavy inputs nominally might be a bit cheaper. They should offset each other.
Ken Shirley, we'll see.
We'll see indeed.
Ken Shirley, the Chief Executive of the Road Transport Forum. Coming up, can a whole community catch Kiwi-itis? The answer after the break. Welcome back to Sector Report. Well, anyone moving onto a rural property expects to run into a couple of surprises, but what happens when you discover that your property is the perfect place to raise and protect a genuinely iconic endangered species, the western brown kiwi? Well, it certainly changed the life of the Schumacher family. It seems to have changed life in their community in Taranaki, and it's certainly changing the life expectancy of the western brown kiwi. Here's the chair of the East Taranaki Environment Trust, Karen Schumacher. Karen, thanks for joining us. Tell me, what got you started on this? I mean, what was your first kiwi experience?
I guess it really goes back to when I was on the Conservation Board, the Taranaki Wanganui Conservation Board, and one of our fellow members was a person by the name of Keith Chappell, and he was absolutely passionate about kiwi and kiwi protection. Rather than give us a percentage of what the kiwi declined, he equated it down to a common denominator, which was 10 a day. And he used to always tell us at the end of every day, there's 10 more birds that we've lost. And so all of the Conservation Board, myself included, became committed to kiwi work and kiwi saving.
10 a day, you know,
Yes.
and the projections are in 130 years at this rate they'll be gone.
Not now. There's a lot of work happening.
No. That's then.
Yes, it
That's
was.
then, before you got going.
Yes.
Tell me though, I mean, when you first thought about taking over the Otanehi Scenic Reserve, what was the attraction, the reserve or the kiwi?
Interestingly, the reserve wasn't there then. We set the reserve up.
Mm-hmm.
We bought the property, and the first thing we did was contact the Queen Elizabeth Second National Trust and got a private covenant put on that. Back in those days, we didn't know we had kiwi.
You didn't know when you walked on?
No.
And what happened when you first saw kiwi there? You said 10 a day.
Well, that's
After
probably
that,
right. We believe that we too had a responsibility to do something about the kiwi.
at that stage, obviously, you had to sort of rethink what you were going to do. What plans did you have to change? Because you suddenly discovered that you had a responsibility.
Interestingly, we didn't really have to change a lot. It added a dimension to our project and to our own property out there. So we still had our farm, we still had the grass that we had our Red Devon cattle on. We continued to do our planting regime we had for our exotic forest. It was merely adding a network of traps to the whole operation. So it just added a dimension rather than changed our property.
Did you know much about caring for the kiwi before you started on this?
No. And by gosh, it's been a learning curve.
What did you learn?
Well, we've been very lucky. In Taranaki, we've got a very talented kiwi practitioner, Sid Marsh, and he's very, very generous with his time and teaching us. We've also got an absolute guru by the name of Darren Peters, who's a DOC head office person, but he's a Taranaki boy.
Nice to know, but I mean, what did you discover for yourself? What didn't you know that surprised you?
That they don't need a lot of help. If you've got a good kiwi population, you don't need to intensely manage them. You can let them just get on with it themselves.
Are they noisy?
At night, yes, very noisy.
I mean, and are they social or are they solitary? I don't know.
They tend to be solitary, but in saying that, when they come out at night time, the first thing they do is give a call to their mate, just to sort of touch base and
Are
say,
those
"Where
distinctive
are you?"
calls?
Oh yes, male and female are very different.
And what about, I mean, between couples?
Duets, they call it.
Yes, I mean, do they actually sing to each other in a different way? Can you distinguish one couple from another?
I personally can't. Bob, my husband, can. They have got different calls and he can pick those. They are very territorial as well, and so they do pick the intruder coming in.
Now tell me, what sort of success have you had? I mean, how many were there when you started, and you got any idea how many you've got now?
We consider our project to be outstandingly successful. When we started, we were a little unsure of our numbers because unlike sheep and cattle, you can't run them through a set of yards and count them. They don't cooperate like that.
No.
Our goal was to have 500 pair under predator protection by 2015, and with our Kiwi call surveys we do and population modelling, the estimate is that we're actually there now, which is 3 years ahead of our target. So we are very successful.
Now, at a certain point in this process, you confessed that you had second thoughts about the whole thing. Tell me why.
We grew the project from 192 hectares to 3,000 hectares and then on to 13,000 hectares. And
I can begin this.
we flew over it in a helicopter and looking down at this rugged terrain with cliffs, no tracks, I looked at it and went, oh my God, what are we getting ourselves into?
Now, what changed your mind? Because you obviously did change your mind.
We put a big map on the table and looked at it very pragmatically and worked out what we needed to do, and we could see that it was actually doable. We identified that we needed to bring the greater population in and allow them to see what we were doing. And the walk itself, we feel, showcases our project. We've been quite lucky that the AA tourism people have actually just included our walk in the 101 things to do in New Zealand. Our website that we're doing is just about to have a booking online system on there. We're actually embracing that opportunity to share what's happening with the greater public.
What about the community around you? I mean, how do they feel about all this?
Like us, the moment they get a kiwi in their hand,
And that's what they can do?
Well, whenever we do kiwi work, we actually always invite our locals to come on board and they will drop everything to come. And the moment they hold a kiwi, they feel that sense of responsibility, just like us, that we have to do something for the kiwi. And it's just looking after the bush, and so they're starting to value the bush. They're too putting covenants onto that property. They just feel ownership.
And you've got a strong Maori segment in your population there, and they've got a special affinity with the kiwi. How do they get on?
Interestingly, the Waitara branch of the Māori Women's Welfare League are our partners. They have been there all the way through. We have 2 different iwi groups that are within our project and the local hapu. They are just very happy that we are doing something to protect their taonga.
Karen Shoemaker of the East Taranaki Environment Trust. And that's all from Sector Report for now. Remember, you can check out our programs anytime online at country99tv.co.nz. Thanks for your company. I'm David Beatson. See you next time.